The whispers started before the plane even taxied to the gate. Seat 22A. A man with a rainbow pin on his jacket sat quietly, his eyes fixed on the clouds outside. The snickers from nearby rows sliced through the hum of the engines, sharp and unrelenting. Ethan Caldwell didn't flinch. 42. He'd heard it all before, every slur, every sideways glance, every muttered joke about the man who dared to be himself. He adjusted the worn Air Force patch on his sleeve, the one with Starfire stitched in bold letters, and let the world blur. This was just another flight, another city, Albuquerque to Seattle, another chance to outrun the ghosts of his past. But the ghosts were stubborn, and so were the sneers from the frat boys in 21C and D, their laughter loud enough to turn heads. "Yo, check out the ferry in 22A. One of them stage whispered, nudging his buddy. Ethan's jaw tightened, but he kept his gaze on the window. He wasn't here to fight. Not today. Across the aisle, Jamie Ruiz watched it all. A photojournalist in his mid-30s, Jamie had a knack for spotting stories in the smallest moments. His camera hung around his neck, lens cap off, ready to capture the raw edges of humanity. Something about Ethan, his quiet defiance, the way his fingers traced the patch like a prayer, caught Jamie's attention. He'd seen that look before, in soldiers, in survivors, in people who carried wars inside them. Jamie leaned forward, his dark eyes narrowing. This wasn't just a man in a seat. This was a story. The plane landed with a jolt, and the cabin erupted into the usual chaos of unbuckling belts and grabbing bags. Ethan stayed put, letting the crowd thin. The frat boys shoved past, one of them accidentally bumping his shoulder. "Sorry, princess," the guy sneered, his friends cackling as they headed for the exit. Jamie's grip tightened on his camera. He wanted to say something, to do something, but Ethan just stood, slung his duffel over his shoulder, and walked off the plane with a soldier's stride. In the terminal, the air was thick with the scent of coffee and jet fuel. Ethan moved through the crowd, his height and broad shoulders cutting a path. Jamie followed at a distance, his instincts screaming that this man was more than he seemed. He noticed the way Ethan's eyes scanned the room, not nervous, but alert, like someone who'd spent years watching for threats. Jamie's lens found him, snapping a candid shot, Ethan, framed against the golden light of the setting sun, his face a mix of pride and pain. Then it happened. A group of Air Force personnel, crisp in their uniforms, stood near the gate. One of them, a young woman with a buzz cut, froze when she saw Ethan. Her eyes widened, and she nudged the officer next to her. "Is that Starfire?" she whispered. The officer turned, his face shifting from curiosity to awe. He straightened, and in a single, fluid motion, he saluted. Ethan stopped dead. For a moment, he looked like he might bolt. But then he returned the salute, sharp and precise, his hand steady despite the tremor in his chest. The other airmen followed suit, their hands snapping to their brows. The terminal fell silent, passengers pausing mid-step, the frat boys gaping from the escalator. Jamie's camera clicked furiously, capturing every second of the moment, the man in the rainbow pin, the salutes, the weight of a story unfolding. Who is he? Jamie muttered to himself, lowering his camera. He had to know. Ethan hadn't planned on Seattle being anything more than a layover. He'd been drifting for years, from one small town to another, chasing jobs that let him disappear. The Air Force was a lifetime ago, 20 years of service, a dozen deployments, and a call sign that still haunted him. Starfire wasn't just a name, it was a legend, whispered in hangars and briefing rooms. The pilot who'd flown into hell and back, who'd saved lives when the odds said he shouldn't. But legends don't pay bills, and they don't erase the scars of being outed in an era when "don't ask, don't tell" was a noose around your neck. He found a quiet corner of the airport bar, nursing a beer he barely touched. The salutes had rattled him. He'd spent so long running from that life, from the memories of comrades lost and a love he'd buried deeper than his medals. His fingers brushed the rainbow pin, a gift from someone he'd lost long ago. He didn't wear it to make a statement. He wore it to remember. Jamie slid onto the stool next to him, casual but deliberate. "Mind if I join you?" he asked, his voice warm but cautious. Ethan glanced over, sizing him up. Dark hair, sharp eyes, a camera that looked like it had seen as many miles as Ethan's flight suit. He shrugged. "Free country." "I'm Jamie," he said, offering a hand. Ethan shook it, his grip firm but guarded. "Ethan." "Saw what happened back there," Jamie said, nodding toward the gate. "That was something. You're not just some guy in 22A, are you?" Ethan's laugh was low, bitter. "You a reporter or something?" "Photojournalist. I chase stories. And you've got one written all over you." Ethan took a sip of his beer, his eyes distant. "Not every story's worth telling." Jamie leaned closer, undeterred. "I disagree. Those salutes. That patch. You're Starfire, aren't you?" I heard the name. Saw the looks on their faces. "What's the deal?" Ethan's jaw clenched. He didn't owe the stranger anything. But something about Jamie's earnestness, the way he didn't flinch at the rainbow pin or the weight of Ethan's silence, made him pause. "You want a story," he said finally. "Buy me another beer. Then maybe I'll talk." By the time the second beer arrived, Ethan was talking not much, but enough. He spoke of desert skies and dogfights, of missions that never made the news. Jamie listened, his camera forgotten, his notebook filling with scribbled details. Ethan didn't mention the pin, or the man who'd given it to him, but Jamie sensed the shadow of someone else in every pause. They left the bar together, the night stretching ahead of them. Seattle's skyline glittered outside, a city of glass and steel that felt both foreign and familiar. Jamie offered to walk Ethan to his hotel, and Ethan didn't say no. There was something about Jamie, his curiosity, his quiet intensity that reminded Ethan of someone he'd once loved, someone he'd lost to a war that wasn't fought with bullets. As they walked, Jamie's questions grew bolder. "Why'd you leave the Air Force? You were a hero. Starfire. That's not a name you just walk away from." Ethan stopped under a streetlight, his face half-shadowed. "You ever love someone so much it scared you?" he asked, his voice raw. Jamie froze, caught off guard by the question. He nodded, thinking of his own past, of a relationship that had burned bright and then burned out. "Yeah," Jamie said softly. "I have." "Then you know why I left," Ethan said, and kept walking. The next morning, Jamie found Ethan at a diner near the hotel, hunched over a cup of black coffee. The photojournalist had barely slept, his mind racing with the fragments of Ethan's story. He slid into the booth across from him, his camera bag thumping onto the seat. "I want to tell your story," Jamie said without preamble. "The real one. Not just the hero stuff. All of it." Ethan raised an eyebrow. "You don't even know what all of it is." "Then tell me," Jamie pressed. "You're carrying something heavy. I can see it. Let me help you carry it." Ethan stared into his coffee, the steam curling like memories. He thought of Michael, the man who'd given him the rainbow pin, the man who'd flown beside him until a missile stole him from the sky. He thought of the years of hiding, of loving in secret, of losing everything when the truth came out. He thought of the salutes in the terminal, the weight of a legacy he'd tried to leave behind. "Maybe," Ethan said finally. "But it's not just my story. It's his, too." Jamie leaned forward, his voice steady. "Then let's tell it together." The diner's fluorescent lights buzzed softly, casting a harsh glow over Ethan's hands as they cradled his coffee mug. Jamie sat across from him, pen poised over his notebook, waiting for the story Ethan had promised. Outside, Seattle's morning rain streaked the windows, blurring the world into shades of gray. Ethan's voice was low when he began, each word measured, like he was stepping onto a minefield. His name was Michael. Call sign Hawk. We met at Lackland Air Force Base, back in '98. I was a cocky kid fresh out of flight school. Thought I could outfly anyone. Michael was different. Quiet, sharp, always 3 steps ahead. He saw through my bravado like it was glass. Jamie scribbled notes, his eyes flicking between the page and Ethan's face. He could feel the weight of this memory, the way it pressed against Ethan's ribs. "What was he like?" Jamie asked, keeping his voice soft. Ethan's lips twitched, almost a smile. "He was the kind of guy who'd quote poetry in the middle of a briefing, then outmaneuver you in a dogfight without breaking a sweat. He had this laugh. God, it could light up a room. But he was careful. We both were. Back then, being out wasn't just a career ender. It was a target on your back." Jamie nodded, understanding the unspoken. The late '90s were a different world, especially in the military. "Don't ask. Don't tell wasn't freedom, it was a cage." He leaned closer. "You two were together, weren't you?" Ethan's eyes darkened, but he didn't look away. "Yeah. Took us a year to admit it, even to ourselves. We'd steal moments late nights in the hangar, empty barracks, places where no one would see. Michael gave me this." He touched the rainbow pin, his fingers lingering. Said it was his way of promising we'd get through it. Together. The story poured out in fragments, each one sharper than the last. Ethan spoke of stolen kisses in the shadow of fighter jets, of missions where they flew wingtip to wingtip, trusting each other with their lives. Michael was the better pilot, Ethan admitted, but Ethan was the one who took risks, who pushed the limits. They were a perfect team, Starfire and Hawk, their call signs whispered with reverence by their squadron. But love in secret is a heavy thing, and the weight grew heavier with every deployment. "We were in Iraq, 2003, Ethan said, his voice dropping to a whisper. Operation Iraqi Freedom. We were running close air support, flying low, too low. Michael's jet took a hit from a SM surface-to-air missile. I saw it happen. Watched his plane spiral. Heard him on the radio, calm as ever, saying he'd try to eject. Ethan's hands tightened around the mug, his knuckles white. He didn't make it. Jamie's pen stilled. The diner's noise-clinking dishes, murmured conversations faded into nothing. "I'm so sorry," he said, the words feeling inadequate. Ethan shrugged, but his eyes were wet. "I flew back to base alone. Reported it. Kept it together until I was alone in the barracks. Then I broke." He paused, staring at the table. "A week later, someone found a letter Michael had written me. Nothing explicit, but enough. Word got out. Suddenly, Starfire wasn't a hero anymore. I was a liability." Jamie's chest ached. He'd heard stories like this: soldiers betrayed by their own, punished for who they loved. "They discharged you." "Not right away. They dragged it out. Investigations. Hearings. I fought to stay, but the writing was on the wall. By 04, I was out. No pension, no benefits. Just this." He tapped the Air Force patch on his sleeve. "And the pin." The silence between them was heavy, but not uncomfortable. Jamie reached across the table, his hand hovering, then resting lightly on Ethan's arm. "You didn't deserve that." Ethan met his eyes, something raw and unguarded flickering there. "Nobody does." Over the next few days, Jamie became Ethan's shadow. He followed him through Seattle, from the hotel to coffee shops to the waterfront, camera always at the ready. Ethan didn't mind, or at least he didn't say so. There was something about Jamie's presence, his quiet persistence, his ability to listen without judgment that made Ethan feel seen in a way he hadn't in years. They talked about everything and nothing. Jamie shared stories of his own growing up in a small New Mexico town, coming out to his family, the way his camera had become his shield and his voice. Ethan listened, surprised at how easy it was to talk to someone who didn't flinch at his truths. They laughed over bad coffee, argued about baseball, and walked through Pike Place Market, dodging tourists and fish throwers. Jamie's lens caught Ethan in moments of unguarded joy, laughing at a street performer, staring out at Puget Sound, the wind tugging at his jacket. But the story wasn't finished. Jamie knew there was more, something Ethan was holding back. One evening, as they sat on a bench overlooking the water, Jamie pressed him. "You said this wasn't just your story. What did you mean?" Ethan's gaze was fixed on the horizon, where the sun bled red into the sea. "Michael's family. They never knew the truth. Not about us. Not about what happened. They think he died a hero, and he did. But they deserve to know who he really was. Who we were." Jamie's heart skipped. "You want to tell them?" Ethan nodded, his jaw tight. "I've been running from it for years. But seeing those airmen salute me, it reminded me I'm still Starfire. And Michael's still Hawk. We deserve to be remembered right." Jamie reached for his hand, a bold move that surprised them both. Ethan didn't pull away. "Then let's do it," Jamie said. "I'll help you. We'll find them, tell their story. Yours and Michael's." Ethan's fingers tightened around Jamie's, a silent agreement. The air between them crackled, not just with purpose, but with something else, something neither of them was ready to name. The search for Michael's family wasn't easy. Ethan had an old address, a small town in Montana where Michael had grown up. Jamie used his contacts, digging through public records and old military files, piecing together a trail. Michael's parents were still alive, living in Missoula, running a small bookstore. His sister, Claire, was a teacher in the same town. They had no idea about Ethan, or about the love that had defined Michael's life. As they planned the trip, Jamie noticed a change in Ethan. The man who'd sat so still in seat 22A was coming alive, his steps lighter, his eyes brighter. But there was fear there, too, a fear of rejection, of reopening wounds that had never fully healed. Jamie felt it, too, the weight of what they were about to do. This wasn't just a story anymore. It was a mission. They rented a car and drove north, the road stretching through forests and mountains, the air crisp with the promise of autumn. Jamie drove, Ethan navigated, and the radio played softly, filling the silences. At one point, Ethan reached over, his hand resting on Jamie's knee. It was a small gesture, but it sent a jolt through Jamie's chest. He glanced at Ethan, who was staring out the window, a faint smile on his lips. "You're trouble. You know that," Jamie said, half teasing. Ethan chuckled. "You're one to talk, chasing a washed-up pilot across the country." "Not washed up," Jamie said firmly. "Legendary." Ethan's smile faded, but his eyes held Jamie's for a long moment. "You keep saying things like that. I might start believing you." The road stretched on, and so did the tension between them, electric, unspoken, and growing stronger with every mile. The Montana sky was endless, a deep blue canvas streaked with clouds that seemed to stretch forever. Ethan and Jamie pulled into Missoula just as the sun dipped behind the mountains, casting the town in a golden haze. The bookstore, a quaint shop called Hawks Haven, sat on a quiet street, its windows glowing with warm light. Ethan's hands shook as he gripped the steering wheel, his eyes fixed on the sign. It was Michael's name, his call sign, staring back at him. Jamie reached over, his hand steady on Ethan's shoulder. "You don't have to do this alone," he said. "I'm right here." Ethan nodded, but his throat was tight. He hadn't seen Michael's parents in 20 years. Not since the memorial service where he'd stood in the back, invisible, unable to speak the truth. Now, he was about to walk into their lives and lay it all bare. He touched the rainbow pin, drawing strength from it, and stepped out of the car. Inside, the bookstore smelled of old paper and coffee. A woman in her late 60s, with Michael's sharp cheekbones, stood behind the counter. Her name tag read Margaret. Ethan froze, his breath catching. Jamie gave him a gentle nudge, and he stepped forward. "Mrs. Larson." Ethan's voice was rough, like he hadn't spoken in days. "I'm Ethan Caldwell." "Knew Michael." Margaret's eyes widened, recognition flickering. "Ethan. Starfire." She stepped around the counter, her hands clasped. "Oh, my God. We heard stories about you. Michael used to talk about you all the time." Ethan's heart pounded. "Can we talk? Somewhere private." She led them to a small office in the back, where her husband, Tom, joined them. He was a burly man with a gray beard, his eyes kind but wary. Jamie stayed close, his camera tucked away, his presence a quiet anchor. Ethan took a deep breath and began. "I flew with Michael," he said. "We were more than that. We were together. In love." The words hung in the air, heavy and fragile. Margaret's hand flew to her mouth, and Tom's face tightened, but neither spoke. Ethan kept going, telling them everything: the stolen moments, the missions, the letter that had cost him his career. He told them about the missile, the crash, the way Michael's voice had stayed calm until the end. And he told them about the pin, pulling it from his jacket and setting it on the table. Margaret's eyes filled with tears. "He never told us," she whispered. "We knew he was hiding something, but we thought it was just the stress of the job." Tom reached for the pin, his fingers trembling. "You loved him," he said, not a question. "More than anything," Ethan said, his voice breaking. The room was silent for a long moment, the weight of 2 decades settling between them. Then Margaret reached across the table, taking Ethan's hand. "Thank you," she said, "for loving him, for telling us." Jamie watched, his chest tight with emotion. He wanted to capture this moment, to preserve it, but his camera stayed in its bag. Some things were too sacred for a lens. That night, Ethan and Jamie stayed in Missoula, sharing a room at a small inn. The meeting with Michael's parents had drained Ethan, but it had also lifted something from him, a burden he'd carried for too long. They sat on the bed, the TV on low, neither of them watching it. Ethan's hand rested on Jamie's, their fingers intertwined. "You were brave today," Jamie said softly. "I know that wasn't easy." Ethan shook his head. "I wasn't brave. I was terrified. Still am." Jamie turned to face him, their knees brushing. "You're allowed to be scared. But you did it anyway. That's what makes you a hero." Ethan's laugh was soft, almost shy. "You're gonna have to stop calling me that." "Not a chance," Jamie said, his voice warm. He leaned closer, their faces inches apart, the air between them charged. For a moment, they just looked at each other, the weight of the day melting into something softer, something new. Then Ethan closed the distance, his lips finding Jamie's in a kiss that was tentative at first, then hungry, desperate, like they'd both been waiting for this moment since the airport. When they pulled apart, breathless, Ethan rested his forehead against Jamie's. "I don't know what I'm doing," he admitted. Jamie smiled, his hand cupping Ethan's face. "Good thing I do." The next morning, they met Michael's sister, Claire, at a coffee shop. She was younger than Michael, with his same quick wit and warm smile. Ethan told her the story, his voice steadier now, bolstered by Jamie's presence. Claire listened, her eyes glistening, and when Ethan finished, she hugged him tightly. "I wish he'd told me," she said. "But I'm glad you did. He'd be so proud of you." They spent the day with Claire, walking through Missoula, sharing stories about Michael. Jamie took photos, not for his project, but for the moments of healing, of connection. He captured Ethan laughing with Claire, the two of them swapping stories about Michael's terrible cooking, his love for bad sci-fi movies. It was a side of Ethan Jamie hadn't seen before, unguarded and alive. As they drove back to Seattle, Ethan seemed lighter, his shoulders less tense. But there was a new question in his eyes, one Jamie could feel building. "What happens now?" Ethan asked, his voice quiet. "With us. With the story." Jamie kept his eyes on the road, his heart racing. "The story's not done," he said. "There's one more piece. The Air Force. They need to know who you are. Who Michael was." Ethan's breath caught. "You want to take this public?" "I want to tell the truth," Jamie said. "Your truth. Michael's. You're a hero, Ethan. Not just for what you did in the sky, but for what you're doing now. The world deserves to know." Ethan was silent for a long time, his hand resting on the rainbow pin. Finally, he nodded. "Okay. Let's do it." Back in Seattle, Jamie got to work. He reached out to his editor, pitching a feature on Ethan Starfire, the pilot who'd defied the odds in the air and on the ground. He combed through archives, tracking down old squadron mates, piecing together the legend of Starfire and Hawk. The response was overwhelming. Pilots, mechanics, even generals who'd heard the stories reached out, eager to share their memories. Ethan had saved lives, risked his own, flown missions that should have been impossible. And Michael had been right there with him, their bond unspoken but unbreakable. As the story took shape, so did something else. Ethan and Jamie grew closer, their days filled with late-night talks, shared meals, and quiet moments that felt like promises. Jamie's apartment became their base, his desk littered with notes and photos, Ethan's flight suit draped over a chair. They were building something, not just a story, but a life. But not everyone was ready for the truth. Jamie's editor warned him about pushback conservative outlets, online trolls, even some in the military who'd rather let the past stay buried. Ethan felt it, too, the old fear creeping back. The sneers from Seat 21C weren't gone. They were just louder, hidden behind keyboards and anonymous accounts. "We're stirring things up," Jamie said one night, scrolling through comments on a preview article. "You okay with that?" Ethan looked at him, his eyes steady. "I've been hiding too long. Let's stir." The article went live on a crisp October morning, its headline bold across the website of a major national magazine, Starfire and Hawk, the untold story of love and valor in the skies. Jamie's words painted Ethan and Michael as they were heroes, lovers, men who'd fought for their country and each other against impossible odds. His photos were searing, Ethan in his flight suit, the rainbow pin glinting, Michael's old squadron patch, the salutes in the airport terminal. The story spread like wildfire, shared across social media, picked up by news outlets, and debated in every corner of the internet. Ethan sat in Jamie's apartment, staring at the laptop screen, his hands clenched. "This is bigger than I thought," he said, his voice tight. The comments were a mixed bag, praise from some, vitriol from others. The frat boys from Seat 21C seemed to have multiplied online, their words dripping with hate. But there were others, two veterans, families, young queer kids who saw Ethan as a beacon, a proof that they could be themselves and still be heroes. Jamie sat beside him, his hand on Ethan's knee. "You're changing lives," he said. "You know that, right?" Ethan shook his head, but his eyes were soft. "You're the one who made this happen. I was just existing." Jamie grinned. Team effort. Starfire. The next few days were a whirlwind. Invitations poured in, interviews, speaking engagements, even a request from a documentary filmmaker. Ethan hesitated, but Jamie was relentless, pushing him to step into the spotlight. "You're not just telling your story," Jamie said. "You're telling Michael's and everyone else's who's been silenced." One invitation stood out, a ceremony at Joint Base Lewis McChord, just south of Seattle. The Air Force wanted to honor Ethan, to acknowledge Starfire's contributions and, in a rare move, to posthumously recognize Michael's. It was a chance to rewrite history, to give them the respect they'd been denied. But it came with a catch-all public event. Cameras, speeches, and the eyes of the world. Ethan paced the apartment, his nerves fraying. "I don't know if I can do this," he admitted one night, his voice raw. "Stand up there, tell the world I loved him, while half of them still hate me for it." Jamie took his hands, pulling him close. "You faced worse than a crowd. You flew into war zones. You survived losing him. You can do this." Ethan looked at him, his eyes searching. "Why do you believe in me so much?" Jamie's smile was soft, vulnerable. "Because I'm falling for you, Ethan. And I don't fall for cowards." The confession hung between them, electric and undeniable. Ethan pulled Jamie into a kiss, fierce and full of everything he couldn't say. They held each other long into the night, the weight of the coming ceremony pressing against the fragile new thing they were building. The day of the ceremony dawned cold and clear. Joint Base Lewis McChord buzzed with activity. Airmen in dress uniforms mingling with civilians, reporters, and a small group of protesters at the gate, their signs spewing the same hate Ethan had heard for years. He stood in a borrowed dress uniform, the rainbow pin proudly displayed, his call sign patch gleaming. Jamie was at his side, camera around his neck, his presence a steady anchor. The ceremony was held in a hangar, a fighter jet parked behind the podium, its tail marked with Starfire in bold letters. Ethan's breath caught when he saw it. The crowd was a sea of faces, some familiar, like the young airman who'd saluted him in the airport, other strangers who'd read the article and come to pay their respects. The base commander, a woman with steel-gray hair and a voice that carried, took the podium. "Today, we honor two men who defined courage," she began. "Captain Ethan Caldwell, call sign Starfire, and Captain Michael Larson, call sign Hawk. Their bravery in the skies saved countless lives. Their love for each other, in the face of adversity, reminds us what it means to be human." Ethan's throat tightened as she spoke, her words cutting through years of shame and silence. She recounted their missions, their sacrifices, and the injustice of their treatment under Don't Ask, Don't Tell. Then she turned to Ethan, her eyes steady. "Captain Caldwell, the Air Force owes you an apology, and a debt of gratitude." The crowd stood, applauding, as she pinned a commendation to Ethan's chest. He saluted, his hands steady, but his eyes were wet. Jamie's camera clicked, capturing the moment, but he lowered it to wipe his own tears. The commander then presented a posthumous award for Michael, handing it to Ethan to deliver to his family. As Ethan stepped to the podium, the hangar fell silent. He looked out at the crowd, at Jamie's proud smile, at the airmen standing at attention. "I never wanted to be a hero," he said, his voice strong despite the tremor in his chest. I just wanted to fly. And to love Michael. We didn't get to live our truth then. But we're living it now. For him. For me. For everyone who's still fighting to be seen. The applause was deafening, drowning out the distant shouts of the protesters. Ethan stepped down, and Jamie was there, pulling him into a hug that felt like home. You did it, Jamie whispered. We did it, Ethan corrected, his voice muffled against Jamie's shoulder. That night, they drove to a quiet overlook outside the base, the stars bright above them. Ethan held Michael's award, his fingers tracing the engraved name. Jamie sat beside him, his camera resting on the dash, his hand in Ethan's. I thought I'd feel empty after this, Ethan said, his voice soft. Like I'd given everything away. But I don't. I feel free. Jamie squeezed his hand. You're not done yet. There's more to your story. Ethan turned to him, his eyes searching. You mean our story? Jamie's heart skipped. He leaned in, kissing Ethan under the starlight, the weight of the past giving way to the promise of the future. They stayed there for hours, talking, laughing, planning. The world wasn't perfect, there were still sneers, still hate, but they had each other. And that was enough. Months later, Ethan and Jamie stood in a small gallery in Seattle, the walls lined with Jamie's photos. The exhibit, titled Starfire and Hawk, was a love letter to Ethan and Michael, to their courage, to their love. Black and white images captured Ethan's journey, the airport salutes, the meeting with Michael's family, the ceremony at the base. Interspersed were Jamie's words, excerpts from the article that had changed everything. The room was packed, a mix of veterans, activists, and curious locals, all drawn to the story of two men who'd defied the odds. Ethan stood by a photo of himself holding Michael's award, his expression a mix of pride and grief. Jamie's hand rested on his back, a quiet reminder of their shared strength. You okay? Jamie asked, his voice low. Ethan nodded, a small smile breaking through. Better than okay. This is what Michael would have wanted. Claire, Michael's sister, approached, her eyes bright with tears. She hugged Ethan tightly, then Jamie. You've given him back to us, she said. Thank you. The exhibit wasn't just a celebration, it was a call to action. Jamie had included a section on the struggles still facing queer service members, a reminder that the fight wasn't over. Donations poured in for veterans organizations, and Ethan found himself speaking at events, his voice growing stronger with each one. He wasn't just Starfire anymore. He was Ethan Caldwell, a man who'd loved and lost, who'd fallen and risen again. As the night wound down, Ethan and Jamie slipped outside, the cool air a relief after the crowded gallery. They walked to the waterfront, the city lights reflecting on the water. Ethan stopped, turning to Jamie. I was thinking, he said, his voice steady but nervous. About staying. Here. With you. Jamie's breath caught. You mean it? Ethan took his hand, the rainbow pin catching the light. I've spent too long running. I'm done. I want to build something. With you. Jamie's smile was brighter than the stars. Then let's build it. They kissed, the world falling away, the weight of the past no longer a burden but a foundation. The sneers from Seat 21C, the hate from the protesters, the years of silence. They didn't vanish, but they mattered less. Ethan and Jamie had found each other, and in doing so, they'd found a way to honor Michael, to live their truth, to make a difference. The next morning, Ethan woke to a message from the Air Force. They were reinstating his benefits, a formal acknowledgement of his service. It wasn't everything, but it was a start. He showed it to Jamie, who laughed and pulled him into a hug. "Told you," Jamie said. "Legendary." Years later, Ethan and Jamie stood on a stage at a Pride event, the crowd stretching out before them. Ethan wore his flight suit, the rainbow pin proud on his chest, Jamie's camera around his neck. They spoke of love, of loss, of the power of truth. Behind them, a screen displayed Jamie's photos, Michael's award, and a new image, Ethan and Jamie, hands clasped, smiling under a Montana sky. The crowd roared, not just for them, but for everyone who'd fought to be seen, to be loved, to be free. Ethan looked at Jamie, his heart full. "We did it," he said, echoing their moment in the hangar. Jamie squeezed his hand. "We're just getting started." And as the rainbow flags waved, as the cheers rose, Ethan felt Michael's presence, not a ghost, but a light, guiding him forward. Starfire and Hawk, forever linked, forever free.